So now let's get to our Maui Growing Manaʻo program. If you don't know him, you're in for a treat. You'll be surprised at how much you will learn in just 20 minutes.
Welcome back to Maui Grown Manaʻo. I'm sorry to disappoint you that you won't see lovely Anela today, but I get to be her understudy. My name is Terry Freitas-Gorman, and I am Director of Community Relations and Patient Affairs for Maui Grown Therapies. I'm joining you today from my office in Kula. I'm just a couple of miles down the hill from our beautiful production center, and welcome to our first crowdsourced webinar. I think we really hit an interesting topic here because we've received more than 50 questions from those of you out there in webinar land, and we only have about enough time today to answer 10 of those questions. But Michael has been kind enough to agree to answer them in writing, and we will be posting those on our website. For those of you who are joining us live for this webinar, we will ask that if you have a question that hasn't been covered, to go ahead and hit that little Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and ask your question. And if we have some time toward the end of this, we'll have Michael take a few questions live. Those of you who know Michael Bacchus may have met him at our Lunch and Learn series, but he's been part of our medical and science advisory board since before Maui Grown Therapies opened. He's a good friend of the family, so to speak. You may also know him as the author of Cannabis Pharmacy, which is the definitive guide to medical use of cannabis. And we are so fortunate at Maui Grown Therapies to have him as our advisor on training, education, and curriculum. So with that, I'd like to welcome you, Michael. How's it going over there in LA today?
Oh, it's good. It's good. Thanks, Terry. Aloha and hello to everyone on Maui. Miss you folks and hope to see you again soon.
Yeah, we do too. It looks like you're sitting in a lavender field over there.
Well, with a couple of cannabis plants.
So, there you go. All right.
You'll look closely. You'll see.
We're going to get started, and I'm going to leave the screen so you guys can just focus on Michael. And since we have so many questions, we're just going to jump right into it. Michael, we had a number of questions about using cannabis to manage pain. So what do you recommend for neurological pain?
Neurological pain, I mean, the clinical, small-scale clinical studies that have been done indicate that CBD is really, really good for nerve pain. But I think for pain in general, I like a combination of cannabinoids. So I may pre-treat myself initially with CBD and then use THC about an hour later. If I can get some CBG into me, which is found in a few types of cannabis flowers and carts, and increasingly in other products as well, a combination of cannabinoids like THC, CBD, CBG, and if you're inhaling cannabis, the terpene myrcene, which is really common in cannabis, it actually activates a pain receptor in your body. So if you could get some THC, some CBD, some CBG, and some myrcene, you're probably going to have the best entourage to treat pain. You have to watch your dose with THC because there does seem to be a sweet spot of dosage for THC in pain, and you don't want to go past it because if you do, you could end up stoned and in pain, which is not the outcome we're looking for. So yeah, that's my approach to pain.
That's interesting because you recommended a pretty powerful entourage there. Does that entourage work for every type of pain or primarily neurological?
It works for every type of pain, chronic, acute, you name it. Again, it's just about controlling your dose and finding the minimum effective dose that relieves your pain. Because typically that's your sweet spot. And you don't want to go past that because what you'll start to do is your body will respond to continued high doses of especially THC, by reducing the number of receptors that the THC can work with within the body. So what you want to do is you really want to control your dose.
We have a question from someone, and I know this is something that you're a little bit of a personal expert on because of your own experience, but what would you recommend for somebody who is coping with migraine headaches?
For migraine, what I like to use is I like to use small doses of THC because I find that for me and for many people, they actually reduce the frequency of the headaches. So I'm using THC as prophylaxis to avoid headaches. In my case, because I get classical migraine, I'm trying to avoid auras that can lead to headaches. And for me, it's been really effective. Part of that will be just that I'm getting older and migraine frequency has a tendency to decline with age, especially in men. But really, I definitely noticed that small doses of THC in the morning can actually prevent me from getting auras throughout the day. And I've used that as a strategy for 2 decades, and it works pretty well for me. If you get a headache, get a migraine headache, then a higher dose of THC, between 5 and 10 milligrams, can help you relax and, just go to a dark room and kind of wait it out. But it'll definitely decrease the pain a little bit. It's not going to eliminate the pain. I don't find typically that THC can stop a migraine, but it can slow its progression a little bit. So that's my experience.
And so your microdose prophylactic of THC, is that a daily thing, weekly? How often do you do
I kind of try to mix it up because what I find is because migraines appear to be linked to your endocannabinoid system, you want to mix it up. So what I'll do is typically I take a tincture about 3 or 4 days a week and not on any fixed schedule. I don't want my body to guess what I'm doing. So what I do is I'll take it 1 day on, 2 days off, 2 days on, 1 day off, 3 days on, and I just mix it up. And that works the best for me.
Our next question is somebody's asking, does cannabis cause tachycardia? And first explain to us, what is tachycardia?
Tachycardia is a racing heart, okay? It's rapid heartbeat. And it can be really scary. And because the reason it's really scary is the part of your brain that mediates fear, called the amygdala, it's watching for stuff like that. And when it senses a rapid heartbeat, it goes to full hypervigilant mode, like what's going on? And so it can release adrenaline and it can make you anxious on top of and that can actually perpetuate your rapid heartbeat. So it can be a tricky cycle. Now, the good news is that it typically disappears over time. If you use THC frequently or control your dose of THC, you won't have the problem. It's caused by the fact that your cardiac muscle, your heart muscle, has cannabinoid receptors that THC interacts with. Same thing happens with your salivary glands, and that's why you can get cotton or dry mouth when you use THC. And so if you think, oh my God, THC is making me dehydrated, or I've got a really dry mouth and I'm thirsty all the time, it's usually a good sign to reduce your dose a little bit of THC. I still get it. I've been using cannabis for decades, but I'll still get it if I take a particularly high dose of THC. It doesn't happen with CBD, doesn't happen with terpenes, just happens with THC. So control your dose. And if you get a dry mouth, what I use is I'll use like a sour candy, because sour candies increase production of saliva. And so it's the best way to get rid of that cotton mouth if you get it from THC.
I have a question. This one came in from one of our listeners relating to that. Is dry mouth the same thing as dehydration? Should you increase your water intake when using cannabis?
I don't think there's much evidence to support that. And the reason that we know that is you don't have a tendency to urinate more frequently when you drink. But with cannabis, the primary symptom of dry mouth is related to the fact that THC is interacting with the receptors in your salivary glands. And so, but Always good to drink water. So, I mean, you can't be too hydrated, really. Yeah, I recommend to always drink water with cannabis or any medicine, if it's okay with your doctor and it feels right to you.
This one may or may not be related to everybody being locked up at home for COVID, but the question is, what's the best strain to take for anxiety? And why does cannabis make me feel anxious?
Okay, so cannabis and anxiety. All right, so if cannabis is making you feel anxious, it's activating. THC is what they call biphasic. It does different things at different doses. And so if you take a low dose when you're anxious, THC will have a tendency to reduce anxiety. But if you take a higher dose, one you're not used to with THC, it can cause anxiety. And so what I do for anxiety related to cannabis is first, see if you can reduce your dose. Okay, that usually works really well. Two, you can take CBD. And CBD calms down that part of your brain that basically activates and causes anxiety, the amygdala, and actually several other structures related to it. And so you can use CBD to kind of tamp that down. And it's quite effective, actually. And you don't need much. About 10 milligrams of CBD will do it.
So do you have a particular strain that you recommend for anxiety management?
Well, you can use any strain as long as you really control your dose. If you want to specifically, if you just have generalized anxiety, then find a high CBD strain or a strain that has a considerable amount, let's say 50-50 THC CBD. But if it's really severe anxiety, number one, you should talk to your doctor about it. And two, you may want to just stick with high CBD cannabis, something like Kula cherries or something like that. You know, something that's associated with high percentage of CBD.
You'd recommend a Kula cherries tincture to pre-treat with that, or use that?
You can use it by itself. Really good for anxiety. I mean, again, 10 milligrams of CBD for a lot of people works pretty well.
Oh, that's
and start it early in the day, and don't take it after 5 p.m. Start it early in the day, because the thing about anxiety is it's good to, if you're having it on a regular basis, it's good to start going after it early in the morning when you start your day. And the reason you don't want to take it after 5 is, you know, for some people it can keep them up at night. So don't take any after 5 p.m. That's my advice.
And this is a good question that kind of segues into the discussion about Kula cherries. Does CBD need a little bit of THC to work its best, or can you take like an isolated CBD?
Well, that's a really good question, because a lot of people are taking CBD isolates these days, and in the form of tinctures that have no THC, often bought on the internet, et cetera, and they come with their own problems like oversight and safety and all that. But my answer is that what physicians are finding who are working with people who are using CBD regularly for various conditions is that at some point the CBD doesn't seem to work as well if it's just given by itself. So there's some very, very smart doctors out there right now who are starting to recommend a little bit of THC with your CBD, and always a little bit of CBD with your THC. I mean, it's the way the plant produces it and the way we've basically bred the plant for thousands of years to have both. And it's only recently that they kind of separated themselves because of the way cannabis breeding went when cannabis was illegal. So my feeling is, yeah, they play better together. So I always try to take a little CBD, and I always make sure I have a little THC when I take CBD, and that works really well for me. Speaking
of THC, we have another question. I find this question very interesting. I think I might have a high tolerance for THC. Is it possible to bring it down?
Yes, it's very possible to reduce your tolerance to THC, and it's just about abstinence, okay? So what you can do is there's several ways you can do it. If you want to just get a short reset, take 3 days off from cannabis, okay? But I mean 3 real clean days, don't cheat, right? And what will happen is your body takes that as a signal to produce CB1 receptors. Because what happens is that when you take THC all the time, and this pertains to THC, not CBD. But if you take THC all the time and you develop a tolerance to its effects, if you, your body reacts by basically reducing the density of CB1 receptors, the THC is interacting with in the brain. And if you stop taking THC for 3 days, they start to come back. This is a system in the body that's ultra responsive, because your body's own cannabinoids are only made on demand. And so because of that, the system is super fast and super sensitive, all right? And if you start taking THC all the time, your endocannabinoid system responds by just reducing these number of receptors. If you take 3 days off, your body goes, whoa, what's happened? And it'll produce those receptors again in a lot of tissues in the body. Now, there's certain tissues it takes longer. And so if you notice that doesn't really, a 3-day washout doesn't really do it for you, you may want to consider a longer break. National Institutes of Health did a 28-day abstinence regimen and found that you basically had a complete reset in your body, that it returned to baseline in all the participants. And there were people in that study who were smoking up to 30 joints a day. I mean, that's a lot. And that works for a complete reset, except in one part of the brain, and that is the hippocampus. And the hippocampus is responsible for memory and learning. And to get that to come back to baseline, you need a 6-month washout. So you really need to stop for a while for it to completely come back to you'd never used cannabis at all. Now, it is interesting to note that in the case of the hippocampus, that people who take CBD regularly along with the THC don't seem to develop that problem in their hippocampus related to memory and learning. So it may be that you can reset for THC in as little as 3 days, and you won't have to worry about the long-term effects on your hippocampus if you take a regular CBD supplement along with the THC.
And then after you've reset with this intermittent fasting type approach, how do you make sure that you don't build up tolerance again?
Dose.
Okay, great.
Yep.
Speaking of dose, we have a couple of questions here that are related. How can I determine the dose of homemade cannabutter or oil? How can I make my own cannabis butter and know the dose? And what is the relationship between dose and effect?
Wow, okay, those are some really good questions. I mean, if you don't have access to any lab results at all for what's going into your cannabutter, it's going to be hard to do. But there are some rough guidelines. If you've got some reasonably potent cannabis, okay, that means typically it's going to come in at 15 to 20% THCA, which is the acidic form of THC, by weight. And that means that you have somewhere between 150 and 200 milligrams of THCA per gram of your cannabis, okay? So you can use that as a rough guide. So what you do is you buy a reasonably accurate kitchen scale, something that goes to 1/10 of a gram, okay? A gram scale won't help because they're not going to be accurate enough to do this kind of measurement. But if you get a 1/10 of a gram scale and you weigh out 10 grams of cannabis, you can figure that you're infusing into that butter a minimum of 1,500 milligrams of THC. Now that means that butter is going to be really, really strong, okay? And what you need to do is you need to weigh the butter, you need to weigh the cannabis, you cook the cannabis, you decarboxylate the weed, which means you convert the THCA to active THC. How you do that is you take the cannabis, you wrap it up in some aluminum foil, you put it in a 325-degree oven for about 7 to 10 minutes. Take it out, let it cool, whip it into the butter, and you can just basically let it cook in the butter for 3-4 hours, and you'll do a pretty complete extraction. Stir it a lot, then strain it out through muslin or cheesecloth, and put it in the fridge. And there are lots of great recipes online for making cannabutter, ones that use a combination of water and the butter, and those are particularly effective. So you can get an online recipe. But what you do is you figure that you're going to have between 150 and 200 milligrams of THCA in every gram of that cannabis. And so at the end of the day, for every gram, you're adding, let's say, take the average of somewhere around 170 milligrams of THC to your butter. And so then you can start to do the math to figure out how to dose it. Okay. It's not like trivial. I mean, you're going to have to do some math. There's no way around it, but that's the way you get accurate dose.
It kind of ties into this question. What's the deal with the lack of edibles? When's Maui Ground Therapies going to get some edible products?
Well, I mean, actually, you should be answering that question, Terry, because you interact with the Hawaii legislature a lot. Do you want me to hand that one to you, or you want me to jump into it?
Why don't you try, and then if it looks like I can add some color, I will.
Okay, so the bottom line is the reason that the edibles are not at Maui Grown Therapies is they're currently not allowed under Hawaii law. There's been a long and intense lobbying effort on behalf of patients and organizations like Maui Grown to try to change those rules. And in fact, there was momentum to do it this year in the legislature, and then COVID came along. And when COVID came along, that's postponed everything relating to changing the rules around medical cannabis to next year. In the meantime, you can use products that are available at dispensaries like Maui Grown, like the lozenges that function like edibles. They're orally administered cannabis. Does that answer the question to reality there, Terry?
I think you answered that quite well. I'd also like to add anybody that would like to help us with the effort to change the law and make sure that edibles are an option for patients. Shoot me an email, terry@mauigrown.com, and I'll add you to the list of folks that are willing to help out with these kinds of things. We're working very hard to increase the number and availability of products for our patients all the time. Another question here, and this one I thought was really interesting. I've never seen it before. Is a water pipe just as safe as a flower vaporizer?
No, it's not. I like flower vaporizers because they operate at a temperature below that at which cannabis combusts, catches fire. And when it catches fire, it starts to put out some toxins that flower vaporizers just don't. And so, yeah, I mean, I've always been a much bigger fan of flower vaporizers. Now, the advantage to smoking is that you get the available chemistry of the cannabis into your body more quickly. So you have to be a little more patient with vaporizers. That's the message. What I always say is vaporizing flowers, it's like smoking in slow motion. You're going to get the essential oils, the terpenes first, and then you're going to get the cannabinoids. And you got to be patient because the cannabinoids have no taste. And so what happens is when people vape flower, they often stop too soon before they've gotten all the cannabinoids because they don't have any cues that there are still cannabinoids there to be vaped. So that's the best approach. So you just, the biggest advantage to flower vaporizers is they're much, much, much more effective and efficient than smoking. Okay, so what happens is that when you smoke cannabis, only about 27 to 30% of the cannabinoids are available. The rest are destroyed in the fire. When you vape, the number goes as high as 80%. So they're very, very efficient at getting cannabinoids off of cannabis.
Another question for you, Michael, is vaporizing a cannabis extract oil the same as vaporizing flower?
Typically, no, unless the extract is exceptionally well made. Like, I mean, if you get some of these live resins, they really do a pretty good job of representing the chemistry of the flower. But again, it's always going to be pretty much close, not exact. Because extraction is just not 100% efficient. So, typically a good extraction may pull 85%, maybe 90% of what's available in the flower off. And the flower has 100%. So typically I find the flower is the best way to get the chemistry into your body. The advantage to using oils is they're super, super convenient and super fast.
We have about 5 minutes left, Michael, so I'm going to take a couple of questions from our Q&A from our participants today. Can you please talk about Delta-8 capsules? I see they're a combination of THC-8 and THC Delta-9, THC Delta-8, THC Delta-9. Can you elaborate on the benefits of these capsules? Many of our patients take Delta-8 capsules for daytime pain relief.
Yeah, I mean, the reports from patients are they're really, really effective and a little bit more clear-headed than THC. Now, that's probably because Delta-8 simply does not get you as high as Delta-9 THC. It's a good way to kind of ratchet down the psychoactivity so that it's more acceptable for daytime use. Yeah, and it's funny because, I mean, there are a lot of these different THC isomers out there. So, there's Delta-9, there's Delta-11, hydroxy THC, which is produced when you eat something. There's even Delta-6 that's still mildly psychoactive. For me, I find that Delta-8 and Delta-9 together is a good daytime medicine for a lot of people. It's clear, it's easier to handle, and it doesn't have a tendency to have that overwhelming effect that occasionally comes from taking Delta-9 THC orally.
That's pretty much the feedback we've gotten from our patients as well. Another question. I'm applying for a Maui County job and worried about the drug test. Even though I have a state-issued cannabis card, it's bothering me. I use distillate and live resins because I have a pain-induced disability. Can this be dealt with? I understand it's a legal issue, but pressure should be put on the folks in Hawaii and other states that do allow legal medical use of cannabis.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that worker rights to use medical cannabis have to be established, and if they're not established right now, it can be tricky. I mean, what I find, you need to talk to people in the organization to see if it's going to be okay with them, because the law right now may not support you. And if you have mandatory drug testing, it can be a problem. Every state that's legalized cannabis for medicinal use has had to deal with this topic, which is what happens if I'm in a job at which I'm drug tested. There are no easy answers. I mean, it really takes concerted lobbying and noisy patience to get the policies changed, especially in companies and governmental organizations that often have zero tolerance requirements. So it's really unfortunate, but just the way it is.
We need more noisy patients. To the person who submitted this question, I want to let you know that Senator Roz Baker from West and South Maui actually did put forth a bill this year to protect employee rights. As long as you do have a cannabis card, you should not be discriminated against from job hiring. If you are a cannabis patient and your job does not include things that involve other people's safety, for example, operating heavy equipment, that type of thing, she believes you should be protected from the loss of that job. We really hope to see that bill come back in 2021. The Hawaii Cannabis Industry Association got behind that. We had quite a few folks testify in favor of it. But there's still a lot of folks out there that don't understand that cannabis, while you may use it at night to help manage pain, that doesn't mean just because you have THC in your bloodstream that you're impaired on the job. And we need to get that information out to people. So to the person who wrote this question, please help us. We need noisy patients to make these points to our lawmakers.
Yeah, and often, I mean, really what's great is when dispensaries and patients team up to lobby legislators, you're going to get a lot more action. Nothing has more power than patient voices. And so the thing is that, you know, make an appointment, go talk to Roz's office and get this going. I mean, it's really one of these things that its urgency will only be equal to the amount of patient voices they're hearing from. So get on it.
That's right. It's great. So I think that is the end of our webinar today. If you submitted a question that came through on your registration and Michael didn't have a chance to answer it today, please check our website. We'll let you know when. It will be fairly soon, but we will be posting your questions with the answers written online so you can see what he has to say.
In front of me, we got a lot of questions. Terry, thank you. Mahalo for filling in for Anela today. You did a terrific job. I really appreciate it.
Thanks to everybody who joined us today, and watch for your inbox next week. Michael's going to be talking about Sativa and
Indica.
Indica.
And what it means, if it means anything at all. But more importantly, what it's going to be about is about choosing the right medicines.
That's right. Okay, we'll see you next week, everyone. Aloha.
Aloha.
Our new live event series delivers free bite-sized information that you can use right now.
There's an enormous amount of misinformation out there. You can build entourages for sleep, for pain, for appetite, anxiety,